What did it really take to eat your way across the Oregon Trail? For pioneers, every biscuit, bean, and bite of salt pork meant another mile toward the promise of a new life. How did food this simple carry so many families through so much hardship? Corn coffee was one of those quiet miracles that kept the pioneers going when real coffee was a distant dream. They would roast dried corn until it turned a rich brown, grind it by hand, and brew it like coffee over an open flame. The smell filled the air with something earthy and hopeful, even if the taste was a little different. Real coffee beans were nearly impossible to find on the trail, and even if someone had them, they saved them for sickness or deep exhaustion. Corn coffee gave them comfort without cost, warmth without waste. Some travelers added molasses or a bit of sugar if they had any to make it taste more familiar. It was bitter, smoky, and honest, just like the life they lived. Every sip felt like a small rebellion against the hardships they faced. It reminded them of home and of mornings that felt normal. They drank it at dawn before hitching oxen or breaking camp, knowing full well the day ahead would be long and rough. For all its simplicity, corn coffee held the same place in their hearts as the finest brew back east. It was, in every way, a pioneer's version of hope in a cup. Wild turkey roast was the kind of meal that felt like a blessing dropped straight from the sky. When a wagon train came across wild game, it was cause for celebration. The men would hunt, and if luck favored them, a plump turkey would make its way to the fire by evening. It was cleaned, plucked, and roasted over open flames until the skin turned golden and the smell brought everyone running. This was no everyday meal. It was rare, and that rarity made it taste like heaven. The women basted the bird with fat or drippings saved from previous meals to keep it moist, while the children waited for scraps or wings to gnaw on. Wild turkey meant more than food. It was proof of survival, of skill, of the land giving something back. Even the bones were boiled for broth afterward because nothing was wasted. It was hearty, smoky, and deeply satisfying, eaten under the stars with hands instead of plates. For one night, everyone felt rich. The warmth of the fire, the laughter, and the full bellies made it easy to forget how cold or endless the trail could feel. Ash-roasted potatoes were as simple as food could get, yet no one ever forgot the taste. You buried them right in the campfire embers, waited for the skins to blister and blacken, then pulled them out with a stick or a piece of cloth. The outside charred, the inside turned soft, buttery, and smoky. Pioneers loved them because they needed no pot, no pan, and no fuss. A handful of salt was luxury, but even plain, the flavor carried a kind of comfort that only fire can give. You could eat them alone or mash them with a little fat if you had some left from salted meat. Kids on the trail loved poking around the ashes to find their own, a small adventure in the middle of hardship. It was food that didn't just fill your stomach, it warmed your bones. For many, that soft, sweet potato flesh tasted like home, even when home was months away. Some called them ember potatoes or cowboy potatoes, but no matter the name, they carried a promise of rest after a long day's march. Few things were as cheap, easy, or soul-steadying as pulling dinner straight from the coals. Homemade butter made from shaking cream was a ritual as old as the road itself. Families carried jars of milk tied to the wagons, letting the motion of travel churn them into something rich and golden. By the time camp was set, a thick lump of butter had formed, and the children would scrape it out with wonder. They rinsed it in cold water, salted it lightly, and spread it on hard bread or johnny cakes. It was one of the few luxuries that tasted like home, a reminder of farms and kitchens they had left behind. The process took patience and faith, two things every pioneer knew well. You could not rush it. The road itself did the work. Sometimes travelers traded butter for supplies, making it as good as coin. That soft, fresh butter could transform even dry hardtack into a small feast. Every family guarded their cream jar like treasure, shaking it during rest stops if the day was calm. It was not just about making food, it was about holding on to normalcy in a life of constant motion. Each golden pat spoke of endurance, care, and a little sweetness earned by sheer effort. Bean cakes were the pioneers' way of turning leftovers into something hearty and new. They mashed boiled beans, mixed them with flour or cornmeal, and fried them on iron pans until golden and crisp. They were filling, easy to carry, and could be eaten hot or cold. Protein was precious, and beans were one of the few sources that lasted the journey. Every bite tasted like survival, made better if someone added onions or a pinch of salt. You could make a dozen from a handful of beans and a cup of flour, which made them perfect for feeding families. The texture was firm outside and soft within, a comfort after endless miles of dry rations. They were humble, sure, but they carried the flavor of perseverance. In some camps, they were called bean fritters, in others, trail cakes. It was the kind of meal that proved ingenuity mattered more than ingredients. Sometimes they were eaten plain, other times with a drizzle of syrup or fat. Bean cakes weren't fancy, but they were dependable, the kind of food that filled both hunger and hope in equal measure. Dandelion root tea was bitter, earthy, and as close to medicine as many settlers ever got. The pioneers dug up dandelion roots, washed them, and roasted them over the fire before steeping them in boiling water. It was strong, dark, and surprisingly comforting after a day on the trail. The taste was far from pleasant, but the drink soothed tired stomachs and helped cleanse the body after weeks of rough eating. For people who lived off salted meats and dried bread, that mattered. Some used it to replace coffee when supplies ran out, adding a bit of molasses to cut the bitterness. Others swore by its healing powers and drank it every morning. It carried the wildness of the land in every sip, a taste of the earth itself. The process of foraging for the roots gave people purpose when supplies ran thin. It was a quiet ritual of resilience, proof that nature always offered something back if you knew where to look. Dandelion tea was no luxury, but it was hope in liquid form, bitter yet grounding, as stubborn and enduring as the pioneers themselves. Maple sugar blocks were tiny treasures carried from back east, sweet reminders of the homes people had left behind. Unlike refined sugar, which spoiled or melted, these hard brown blocks lasted for months on the trail. They could be shaved into coffee, crumbled into porridge, or licked straight from the hand on tough days. For children, they were candy. For adults, they were comfort. Maple sugar was expensive to buy and precious to carry, so every piece was used carefully. Families often rationed them the same way they rationed flour or salt, saving them for birthdays, holidays, or moments when spirits ran low. The taste was rich and deep, like a whisper of home carried in a saddlebag. Sometimes it was traded for medicine or ammunition, but most people guarded their blocks like gold. Even one small taste could lift a weary traveler's heart. In a world of scarcity, sweetness became a kind of grace. When campfires burned low and nights turned cold, that little piece of maple reminded them that not everything worth savoring had to be lost. Sourdough starter bread was a living companion on the trail, bubbling quietly in a jar tied to the wagon. It needed no yeast, just flour, water, and patience. Every day it was fed and stirred like a member of the family. The heat of the sun and the shaking of the wagon kept it alive. When it was time to bake, a lump of dough would be shaped and cooked on hot stones or in iron pots buried under coals. The result was dense, tangy, and nourishing, a true pioneer's bread. No two loaves ever tasted the same, since every starter carried a bit of the land it passed through. The settlers treated it with care because losing it meant starting over, and that was never easy. Bread was more than food. It was comfort and ritual. Each slice shared around the fire reminded them that even out here, they could still make something with their hands. Sourdough was the soul of the trail, wild, unpredictable, and alive, just like the people who baked it. Boiled wheat porridge was the kind of meal that started slow and stayed with you all day. Made from whole wheat grains simmered in water or milk, it was thick, chewy, and heavy in the best way. When cornmeal ran short or oats were gone, this was the next best thing. It filled empty stomachs and stretched whatever supplies were left. The pioneers sweetened it with molasses or maple sugar if they were lucky. but often it was plain and simple. Its warmth felt like kindness after nights of cold travel. Mothers loved it because it fed children easily and kept them full through long days of walking. Some travelers even mixed in bits of dried fruit or bacon grease to make it heartier. It wasn't glamorous, but it was dependable, the kind of meal that quietly kept people alive. The pot was set early, and by morning, the smell of boiling grain filled the camp like a promise. It was steady, honest food, humble but strong enough to carry families westward mile after mile. Game bird broth was what happened when the hunt went well but not well enough for a feast. Pioneers simmered small birds like quail, prairie hens, or pigeons with wild onions or herbs found nearby. The broth was thin but rich with flavor and nourishment. It could stretch a single bird into dinner for a family of 6. Every spoonful carried the essence of smoke, wild meat, and the land itself. When the days were cold and the body weary, this broth was like medicine. The bones were boiled until they gave up everything they had, leaving nothing wasted. A few roots or potatoes might go in, but even plain, it comforted the spirit. It reminded everyone that even scraps could be turned into something sustaining. In the quiet of the plains, that thin, steaming soup became a small miracle. It warmed hands, hearts, and hope. After a long march, sitting by the fire with a bowl of game bird broth was enough to make anyone believe they could go just one more day. Fried hominy cakes were crispy, golden miracles that filled the air with the smell of home. Made from ground hominy shaped into small patties, they were fried in pork fat until the edges turned brown and crackled in the pan. Hominy was hearty, cheap, and endlessly useful, and frying it made even the simplest ingredients feel rich. When flour was low or bread long gone, these cakes became the centerpiece of breakfast or supper. Their insides stayed soft and warm, while the outside crisped like heaven. Families often ate them with a drizzle of molasses or a bit of gravy, but even plain, they tasted like something worth remembering. They were food for hard workers, easy to cook on a skillet over open flame and quick enough to make before the sun climbed too high. Children loved them, and so did weary travelers who needed something that felt like comfort. You could carry leftovers wrapped in cloth and eat them cold hours later. Fried hominy cakes were the perfect mix of thrift and pleasure, a southern soul carried westward on the wagon road. Each bite carried a crunch of perseverance and a taste of pride that no hardship could take away. Wild plum jam was one of the sweetest surprises the trail had to offer. The fruit grew wild along riverbanks, small and tart, waiting for someone patient enough to pick them. Families would gather buckets full and boil them down with whatever sugar they had left. The smell alone lifted spirits for miles. In a world of salt and smoke, that burst of sweetness was almost shocking. Most people stored it in small jars or tins, guarded like gold. It was spread thinly on biscuits, stirred into porridge, or saved for special mornings. The jam's deep color and bright taste reminded them of orchards they had left behind, of seasons that felt far gentler. Wild plum jam was never wasted, not even a spoonful. When supplies ran low, it became a treasure shared sparingly, a reminder that life still held a little beauty. The land could be cruel, but it could also be kind enough to give fruit to the hungry. That jar of jam was proof that sweetness could still be found, even in the harshest stretches of the trail. Jerusalem artichokes were strange little roots that became a gift to those willing to dig for them. They grew wild in the plains, knobby and pale beneath the dirt, and roasting them turned their flesh soft and nutty. They were the hidden food of survival, humble, nourishing, and free. When the wagons ran short on potatoes or beans, people went searching for these tubers near creeks and riverbeds. Roasted with a bit of fat or boiled with salt, they filled hungry bellies and kept energy high. The flavor was earthy, slightly sweet, something between a potato and a sunflower seed. Children laughed at their odd shapes, but everyone was thankful for them. They could be eaten fresh or dried for later, a little insurance against empty camps. Jerusalem artichokes reminded travelers that even in wilderness, food waited to be found if you knew where to look. They turned hunger into discovery, hardship into something that felt almost abundant. Those roasted roots became one of the quiet heroes of the frontier table, proving that even the wildest soil had kindness in it. Sage and onion dressing was a rare bit of warmth in a world that demanded simplicity. Made from leftover bread soaked with fat or broth mixed with wild sage and onions, it smelled like home, even when home was 1,000 miles away. The ingredients were humble, but the taste was rich and comforting. You could bake it in a small iron pot or cook it in a skillet beside meat if you were lucky enough to have any. The herbs gave a sense of celebration to an otherwise plain meal. Every bite felt soft and savory, with the sage filling the air around the fire. It was one of those dishes that made a family pause, if only for a moment, and feel civilized again. Even the smell brought back memories of proper kitchens, of holidays, of family voices left behind. Sage and onion dressing reminded the weary that good food did not need plenty, just care. It was proof that even on a rough road there was still room for comfort, flavor, and a little grace. Campfire apple rings were a sweet surprise that turned hard travel days into something tender. Pioneers sliced apples thin, threaded them on strings, and hung them near the fire to dry slowly overnight. The heat pulled out the moisture and left behind chewy, caramel-like rings that tasted like sunshine trapped in fruit. Fresh fruit was rare, and this was one way to make it last weeks instead of days. The smell filled the camp, mixing with smoke and pine. Children loved sneaking bites before the rings were ready, and parents pretended not to notice. Dried apples were stored in cloth bags and eaten as trail snacks or boiled later into pies. They were portable pieces of comfort, reminders that sweetness could be made from patience. When shared around the campfire, those rings became small gifts of joy, passed from one tired hand to another. Each ring carried a taste of home orchards, of a gentler time, and a promise that good things still existed out there on the trail. Rabbit pie was one of the true feasts of the Oregon Trail, a meal that felt almost like a holiday. Catching a rabbit took luck and skill, and when it happened, it brought smiles all around. The meat was stewed with onions, carrots, and herbs if any were at hand, then tucked beneath a crust of flour dough and baked in a Dutch oven. The smell alone could lift the whole camp's mood. It was hearty, savory, and soft enough for even the youngest to eat. People gathered close as it cooked, waiting for that first warm slice. Rabbit pie was the kind of food that made the struggle feel worth it. It turned a wild catch into something civilized, something to savor. The crust was rough and uneven, the filling thin, but it felt rich as gold. On nights when rabbit pie was served, laughter returned to the wagons. It reminded everyone that even the wilderness could offer luxury if you knew how to work with what you had. Roasted acorns were proof that necessity could make anything edible. Pioneers gathered them in handfuls, cracked their shells, and soaked the nut meats in water to wash away the bitterness. Once leached, they were roasted on iron pans until fragrant and crisp. The result was a nutty, smoky snack that carried the taste of the woods themselves. Acorns were food for the desperate and the patient. They took time but rewarded it well. Some ground them into meal to thicken stews or make a kind of flour for flatbread. Others mixed them with honey or fat when available, turning them into simple trail bars. The flavor was rough but satisfying, the kind of taste that reminded you that survival had its own flavor of sweetness. Even children learned to tell which oak trees bore the best ones. Roasted acorns were the wild's answer to hunger, humble yet sustaining. They taught travelers that even the smallest things could hold life when the land itself seemed empty. Cowpea stew was slow, thick, and full of quiet strength. Dried cowpeas came west with settlers from the south, carried in small sacks tied with twine. When soaked and boiled with salt and a bit of fat, they turned into one of the most reliable meals on the trail. The stew was simple, just beans, water, and whatever scraps you could spare, but it filled the camp with warmth. It was hearty enough to share, easy enough to make, and nourishing enough to keep a family going another week. People sometimes called it field pea soup or wagon beans, but everyone knew what it meant: survival in a pot. The flavor deepened the longer it simmered. and even the poorest ingredients blended into something whole. Cowpea stew carried the memory of home kitchens in Georgia and Mississippi, brought westward by tired hands and hopeful hearts. It was food that belonged to everyone and asked for nothing more than a little patience and a good fire. Lemon vinegar drink was the frontier's version of medicine and refreshment all in one. A spoonful of vinegar mixed with water and a squeeze of lemon created a sharp tonic that cooled the body after long hours under the sun. Some travelers believed it kept away sickness or helped prevent scurvy when fresh fruit was scarce. The taste was puckering but oddly pleasant, a jolt that cleared the head and lifted fatigue. It became a regular part of life on the trail, especially in the hotter plains. Mothers would pour it for children in tin cups, while fathers drank it after driving oxen for miles. The mix of tartness and bite gave it the nickname Pioneer Lemonade. It was cheap, practical, and strangely addictive. Even without sugar, it reminded them of summer markets back east, of health and home. On days when spirits ran low, that sour sip was a reminder that life, like vinegar, could still have bite and purpose. Pressed cheese wedges were solid gold to anyone traveling west. Wrapped in waxed cloth and packed tight in crates, they could last months without spoiling. Cheese was a traveler's treasure, dense, portable, and full of fat and salt that the body needed to endure the endless march. A small wedge could flavor a whole pot of grits or make dry bread taste rich again. Families rationed it carefully, cutting it into tiny slices and sharing it around the fire. Some traded it for coffee or ammunition, others guarded it like coin. It smelled sharp and comforting, like memory itself. Pressed cheese reminded the pioneers of steady farms and quiet kitchens, of home tables they might never see again. On long nights, one bite could bring back warmth that no fire could match. For a people always moving, that cheese was not just food. It was belonging, packed and carried westward through dust, hunger, and hope. Oat cakes were the kind of meal that proved just how much you could do with almost nothing. Made from rolled oats mixed with water and pressed flat, they were cooked on hot iron griddles until crisp at the edges and chewy inside. They were simple, quick, and perfect for travelers always on the move. A handful of oats and a little patience could turn into a meal that kept you strong for hours. Some pioneers added a pinch of salt or bacon grease if they could spare it, but even plain oat cakes carried warmth. They were easy to pack and slow to spoil, making them one of the most dependable foods on the trail. Eaten with syrup, molasses, or dried fruit, they became a kind of comfort disguised as survival. The smell of oats on the fire was soft and familiar, a whisper of home kitchens far away. Each cake was made by hand, one at a time, often while the wind howled and the fire smoked. Oat cakes reminded the pioneers that the simplest food, made with care, could be enough to carry them one more mile into the unknown. Pemmican was the trail's lifeline, born from native wisdom and carried into every wagon and camp. It was made by mixing dried meat, melted fat, and crushed berries into a dense, lasting paste. Once cooled, it hardened into bars that could survive heat, cold, and time. A small bite packed enough energy to last for hours. It was rich, oily, and slightly sweet from the fruit, a flavor that tasted like endurance itself. Hunters dried buffalo, deer, or beef for it, pounding it fine with stones before adding the fat. The berries, cranberries or choke cherries if they were lucky, added both color and strength. Pemmican didn't spoil easily, which made it priceless. Mothers carried it in cloth bundles for children, men packed it tight for long hunts. It wasn't glamorous, but it was powerful, and everyone who traveled west owed their survival to it at least once. It was the food of the land and of the people who knew it best. Every bite carried a memory of cooperation and survival shared between cultures trying to endure the wild. Turtle soup was one of the rarest luxuries found on the trail, made only when the journey met a river full of luck. Catching a turtle took skill and patience, but when it happened, it meant a real feast. The meat was rich, mild, and surprisingly tender once simmered for hours in a pot of water, onions, and herbs. Bones, shell, and all went in, releasing flavor into the broth that tasted like both river and fire. For those who had only dried beans or bread for weeks, it was a miracle in a pot. Families gathered around the bubbling stew, watching the steam rise and smelling the faint sweetness of the meat. Turtle soup became a symbol of abundance earned through work and faith. It filled the belly, soothed sore muscles, and gave a sense of victory over hunger. Some travelers even saved the shells as keepsakes. It was a dish that turned an ordinary night by the river into something close to celebration, reminding everyone that nature still had gifts to give. Boiled turnips with salt might not sound like much, but on the Oregon Trail, they were comfort in a pot. Turnips were tough little vegetables, able to survive weeks in wagons without rotting. When boiled in salted water, they softened into something warm and satisfying. Their taste was earthy, simple, and familiar to anyone raised on farm food. Sometimes a bit of pork fat or onions was added, but even plain, they gave strength. After days of dry rations, the smell of boiling vegetables was a kind of happiness. Turnips reminded people that the soil still had kindness to offer, even in the harshest land. They were food that didn't complain, steady, reliable, easy to grow, and easier to love. Children might have frowned at them, but everyone ate until the pot was empty. The warmth lingered long after, filling both body and heart. It was not a meal of abundance, but of quiet endurance, and that made it beautiful in its own right. Rye flour dumplings were humble, heavy, and as comforting as a warm blanket on a cold night. Made from coarse rye flour mixed with water and a pinch of salt, they were dropped into bubbling stews to thicken them. Rye was cheaper and more available than wheat, and its strong flavor matched the roughness of the road. As the dumplings cooked, they soaked up broth and fat, turning tender and chewy inside. They stretched small portions of meat or vegetables into full meals, feeding more mouths without using more supplies. Their taste was hearty and faintly nutty, simple but deeply satisfying. The steam from a pot filled with rye dumplings carried a smell that wrapped around campfires like comfort. For travelers who had little left to spare, they were proof that plain food could still feel rich. Each dumpling was like a small act of love, shaped by tired hands trying to make something good out of what little remained. Bacon-greased cornbread was the heart of many a campfire supper. With butter and milk hard to find, settlers used leftover bacon drippings to bring flavor and moisture to their bread. The result was smoky, golden, and full of comfort. It baked right in the skillet, bubbling and sizzling as it turned crisp at the edges. The smell of it cooking could stop conversation mid-sentence. Even the smallest slice filled the stomach and lifted spirits. Bacon grease gave the bread a deep, savory taste that made it feel rich even without sugar or butter. It paired perfectly with beans, stew, or even just coffee in the morning. This bread wasn't fancy, but it carried the taste of home, warmth, and shared meals. Every crumb was eaten, every bite savored. It was the kind of food that made a long day of labor fade away, if only for a little while. In a world of hardship, bacon-greased cornbread was a soft reminder that comfort could still be baked right over an open flame. Cranberry leather was the pioneer's answer to candy, bright, tart, and tough enough to last through the journey. Fresh cranberries were crushed and mixed with a bit of sweetener if anyone had it, then spread thin and left to dry in the sun. Once hardened, it could be rolled up and stored for months. Each bite was chewy, sharp, and refreshing, a burst of flavor in a world that tasted mostly of salt and smoke. It gave quick energy on long marches and was light enough to carry in pockets. Children loved it, and adults relied on it as a travel snack when nothing else was left. It might not have been soft or fancy, but it was a small joy pulled straight from the wild. Cranberry leather was proof that even hardship had moments of sweetness. On cold nights, a bit of that bright red strip reminded travelers of berries and spring and everything that waited beyond the horizon. Trail mix of nuts and seeds was the traveler's quiet miracle, simple yet powerful enough to keep a body moving when every other supply ran low. Pioneers gathered what the land allowed: sunflower seeds, walnuts, pumpkin seeds, and pine nuts, roasting them gently in iron pans over open fires. The scent was warm and earthy, rising like a promise that nature would provide what men could not. Unlike heavy breads or salted meat, this food never spoiled and required no cooking or fire. A single handful could last hours, feeding strength into tired limbs across endless plains. Sometimes dried cranberries, raisins, or small strips of jerky were mixed in when luck or trade permitted. Each bite snapped and crackled, reminding them that even in hunger, something vibrant still existed. The mixture traveled well in pouches, tucked into pockets and passed quietly between families. It was both snack and sustenance, born of instinct and simplicity. Trail mix had no scent of home, but it carried the feeling of survival, the wild, steady heartbeat in edible form. It was the land's own ration, proof that endurance came in small, humble handfuls. Every crunch felt like another mile conquered, another promise kept. Pine needle tea was the forest's own medicine, steeped in patience, smoke, and survival. When the wind cut sharp and supplies dwindled, pioneers turned to the trees themselves. They gathered young green needles, crushed them gently, and steeped them in boiling water until the steam filled the air with something sharp, bright, and alive. The tea carried vitamin C, a gift against scurvy and exhaustion, and tasted like the clean breath of the mountains. It was tangy and resinous, awakening the senses after long days of travel. Some travelers sweetened it with honey or molasses if fortune allowed, but most drank it plain, grateful for its warmth and strength. Making it became a ritual of calm, a pause in the storm of movement and dust. The smell wrapped around campfires, reminding them that the wilderness could still offer care instead of danger. Each sip soothed aching throats, settled the stomach, and reminded weary travelers they were still part of the living earth. Pine needle tea was not luxury, it was resilience distilled into warmth. It was the forest whispering, "You will endure, just as I have." And in that quiet moment, every drinker believed it. Campfire custard was the taste of grace in a life ruled by hardship. Made from eggs, milk, and sugar, ingredients saved and guarded, it was baked slowly in a covered iron pot tucked near glowing coals. The fire hummed softly as the mixture thickened, filling the air with sweetness that seemed almost unreal on the open trail. The smell of warm milk and caramelized sugar drew every weary face toward the fire. This was not just food. It was reward, relief, and memory. Families made it on birthdays, holidays, or rare nights when the road felt kind. It was spooned out in small servings, each bite soft, smoky, and rich enough to make silence fall. Even the toughest men closed their eyes, remembering kitchens left far behind. For a brief moment, hardship faded, and laughter found its way back into the camp. Campfire custard was proof that beauty still belonged to those who worked hardest to survive. It showed that sweetness, like hope, could bloom even in ashes. In that golden spoonful, the weary found peace, and the long road west felt just a little shorter. If you'd have tasted even one of these trail meals, drop your favorite below and hit like and subscribe to keep the wagon rolling west.